Welcome back to Appalachian Horror. Tonight, I've got 9 true disturbing stories straight from the Appalachian backwoods. Accounts of surveyors, contractors, and wanderers who went in with maps and came back with nightmares. From strange stone circles stacked in impossible ways, to whispers rising from abandoned cabins, to figures that knock softly in the dead of night. Each tale shows why some paths in these mountains are better left forgotten. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, share this video with your friends, and let me know where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. I never thought graduate school would send me walking alone into the Cumberland foothills, but there I was trudging with too much gear on my back and not enough sense in my head. I'd been awarded a small university grant to document unexplored drainage basins and forgotten trails in the southern Appalachian corridor. My research focused on how folklore and geography overlap, how old stories often sprang from misplaced topography. A stream where a stream shouldn't be, a cave too far from limestone seams, or an entire hollow that never appeared on official records. Most of my colleagues stuck to oral histories or dusty county archives. I, unfortunately, had the bright idea to prove things in the field. 3 days on foot, alone, fixing mismatched maps and gathering evidence. No assistance. No faculty sponsor hovering over me. Just me, my notebook, and a digital recorder stuffed between granola bars. I left my little sedan parked in front of a rusted cattle gate on the edge of Clay County, Kentucky. The road beyond it used to be serviceable decades ago, but had since collapsed into a patchwork of shale and eroded clay. My topo charts showed a decommissioned fire access trail threading its way into the high ridges. Nobody I'd spoken to in town could tell me where it ended, but they all warned me the same way. A vague shake of the head, a muttered "don't wander past the laurels," like it was advice so obvious it hardly deserved repeating. One old man at the gas station even spat on the pavement and told me that if I heard whistling out there, I should run until I hit asphalt again. He never explained why, and I didn't press. Country warnings always walk the line between superstition and survival tip. The first miles weren't too bad. The trail began as little more than a dent in the undergrowth, but I've got a knack for following faint impressions. Low hills, broken stone, tangles of rhododendron that clawed at my sleeves. The summer humidity pressed like wet wool against my face. Every half mile I marked GPS points and cross-checked with the maps. So far so good, but the deeper I walked, the stranger the terrain became. First it was small things. A chimney standing alone on a slope, its bricks strangled by moss. Then an abandoned deer stand so warped it looked melted. Landmarks out of joint with the clean digital contour lines I carried in my pack. None of it surprised me. Appalachia is littered with remnants of people who came, built, and fled. By late afternoon I'd reached the ridge that was supposed to host a collapsed fire tower. The aerial images suggested its skeleton still clung to the hilltop. Sure enough, I found 4 corroded metal legs jutting from the earth like a dead insect. The platform had given way decades earlier, leaving only rusted slats dangling high overhead. I pitched my tent in the shadow of Mountain Laurel a little downhill, where the ground was even and dry. After boiling rice and chewing through strips of jerky, I drifted off fast, full and exhausted. What woke me that first night wasn't a dream. My eyes snapped open like a switch had been flipped. The forest was silent, heavy, too heavy. I lay still until I heard it, a brittle snap, like a heavy weight pressing a dead branch. 30, maybe 40 feet to my right. I've camped enough to know the rhythms of deer or raccoons. This was slower, heavier, too deliberate. Another crack followed after a long pause. Different angle. My skin prickled as the sound circled, measured, never anxious, never random. I slid my hand to the side pocket of the tent and closed fingers around my flashlight and knife. I never turned the light on. I just waited, frozen. Hours might have passed. The silence was eventually so complete I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it. Until dawn came and I crawled outside. The ground around the tent looked undisturbed, no tracks, no broken brush. But 10 feet away, directly on the faint trail, stood a small tower of flat stones, 4 of them stacked in perfect descending order. Balanced so neatly a breeze should have toppled it. I knew it hadn't been there when I arrived. Trail markers don't sprout overnight. I didn't touch it. I just took photos, logged the coordinates, and pressed on. but my gut churned in a way I didn't write down in any field notes. The ridge climb sharpened into an almost vertical scramble. When I finally hauled myself up the last stretch, the land leveled into something impossible. A wide stone shelf, then an abrupt cliff dropping into a basin no map acknowledged. Not digital, not historic, not county survey. Nothing. The satellite images had shown only a contour error, as if the land folded incorrectly on screen. Yet here it was, a full valley sealed by ridges, a half-mile wide at least. Oaks and beeches thickened below. It shouldn't have been hidden, but it was. I descended carefully, half dizzy with the sense I was stepping into something no one else had walked in generations. Near the basin's center lay the strangest sight yet, a ring of stacked river stone 15 feet across, 3 feet tall, packed so tightly the gaps vanished. Inside it, the ground sank in a perfect circle a foot deep, its soil hard and bare as if thousands of feet had tamped it down. No moss, no weeds, not even ants crawling across it. The air seemed thinner inside that space. I didn't step in. I just circled with my camera, whispering notes into the recorder, then left quick and uneasy. Folklore is built from shapes like that. When I returned to my camp, my chest went cold. The tent wasn't where I'd left it. It had been lifted whole, moved 2 feet to the left, and set down neat as a dollhouse. Nothing inside was touched. No drag marks scored the dirt. Stakes gone, but no tearing, as if giant invisible hands had simply picked it up. I wanted to believe fatigue made me misremember the placement, but I couldn't. Worse, at the base of the fire tower, someone had arranged another stack of stones, 6 this time, taller, thinner, impossibly balanced. My hands shook too much to take a picture. I packed in silence, every sound of zipper and strap too loud against the forest hush. The trail out was quicker, my legs pushed by unease. That's when the whistling began. High and thin, lasting 5 seconds, repeating with mechanical regularity every 15. Always the same pitch, always just far enough behind me that I couldn't see its source. At first I slowed, listening, hoping it would fade. Instead it matched me, pace for pace, like a clock tethered to my steps. By mile 3, panic took over and I ran, pack slamming my back, knees jolting against rocks. The whistle never sped or slowed, only pulsed, always close, always there. When exhaustion forced me into a cautious crawl along a switchback, a dim yellow glow flickered ahead on the trail. It wasn't my headlamp. It pulsed in and out like firelight, but not like any torch or lantern I'd ever seen. It didn't sway. It simply hovered. I killed my light and crouched in brush, heart hammering. The glow held steady. Behind me, the whistle shrilled again, closer than before. I couldn't bear both at once. I lunged off the trail, slamming through undergrowth, skin ripped by branches, boots slipping mud until, by some luck, my headlights winked through trees. My sedan still sat at the gate, windshield glinting. But on the hood, someone had left another sculpture of stones. 7 this time, balanced in precise symmetry. And on the passenger seat inside my locked car lay a torn page of notebook paper. Not mine, not weathered, fresh. No writing, only a charcoal drawing, concentric circles, and in the middle, a faceless stick figure. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just started the car and fled. I drove until asphalt stretched familiar beneath me, then pulled into a ranger station, shaking and sweat-soaked. When I asked about the hidden valley, the ranger gave me a vague shrug. Technically federal land, he said, tapping the map. But no one goes in. Terrain's unstable. Nothing worth seeing. His eyes didn't linger on me long. I deleted the GPS points, burned through the photos, and shredded the page into confetti outside a rest stop an hour later. Still, I dream about that whistle. I hear it sometimes faintly when I'm walking campus at night, 5 seconds long, always the same pitch, always every 15 seconds like the slow ticking of something waiting. And sometimes, on my desk when I unlock the office door in the morning, there's a pebble that wasn't there when I left, balanced perfectly on its edge, like it shouldn't be possible at all. My name is Aaron Whitlock, and I'm 42 years old, though my joints creak like a man 10 years older. I wasn't supposed to be here in the first place. My profession isn't glamorous. I restore and digitize old county survey maps for the state archive. Most days I'm hunched over a scanner or cleaning mildew off yellowing topo sheets from the 1920s. But once in a while the department taps me for field checks. when the documents are too inconsistent, when a trail or cut appears in one record but vanishes in another. Most people decline these assignments. They pay no extra, they send you alone, and they usually involve places no hiker in their right mind bothers with anymore. I didn't decline. Not this time. My supervisor knew I'd recently gone through a messy divorce, that I had no kids at home, no one to come back to on weekends. "It might be good to get some fresh air," she said. Fresh air, and 200 square miles of neglected mountain wilderness on the Tennessee, North Carolina border. They called the area the Nolichucky Tract, though it had never been properly incorporated into any county system. Officially, it was part of a national forest, but it was the kind of land rangers rarely patrolled and tourists never heard about. The only references we had were brittle sheets drawn by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, crooked brown ink lines marking trails, handwritten notations like bridge unstable or cut off to mine. Nothing on modern databases matched those paths. The mission was simple: walk in, confirm what was still there, document what wasn't, and redraw it digitally once I returned. I packed light: 4 days of rations, a tent, 2 GPS units, a compass, solar battery, and more notebooks than I'd ever fill. I told myself it would be therapeutic. Walking, working, not thinking about lawyers or custody hearings. Just the mountains and me. I parked my Jeep on the edge of a broken gravel lane that once served as a fire road. The last mile was so rough with shale it sounded like I was driving over dishes. I killed the engine at a barricade of fallen pines and shouldered my gear. It was early summer, air thick and buzzing with insects. The first leg was gentle, rolling ridges, knee-high ferns, the faint ghost of a trail winding through rhododendron thickets. Every 100 yards or so I marked GPS points, though half the time the coordinates jittered between elevations that made no sense. I'd grown used to digital hiccups. Nothing in this terrain ever matched cleanly. I stopped once at the skeleton of an old wagon half buried in mud, a sapling splitting straight through its rust-flaked axle. The forest never hesitated to reclaim what men left behind. That night I made camp beside a trickling branch. The water was low but clean enough once boiled. I ate dehydrated chili from a pouch and read through my notes by headlamp. The forest was alive with sound. Tree frogs chirring, owls muttering, something larger crashing far off through brush. I wasn't uneasy. Appalachia at night is rarely silent, and when it is, that's when you worry. I fell asleep fast, the kind of heavy sleep that comes from walking 10 miles under a pack. The second day tested me harder. My planned loop cut toward a slope where the old CCC maps suggested a bridge once crossed. I never found the bridge, just shattered planks on a stream bank and the rotting skeleton of a support post. Not far beyond that, the land folded into a dry creek bed carved deep into the earth. It wasn't on any map. The channel twisted violently side to side, not smooth like erosion but thrashed, gouged. I crouched, pressed a hand to the packed soil, expecting tire ruts or boot marks. Nothing. No prints. No reason a creek should look like it had been dragged screaming down the mountain. I climbed out faster than I'd gone in. Mid-afternoon I crested a knoll and nearly stumbled into a chimney standing alone. No house around it, no foundation, just stone blocks fused with moss. In its shadow lay rusted scraps, fragments of enamel pots, bent tools, wire coiled like dead snakes. Something caught my eye half buried in leaves at the base, a rod of iron, 2 feet long, heavier than it looked. Its ends were twisted into shapes I didn't recognize. One side corkscrewed tight, the other forked into 2 jagged prongs. They weren't letters. They weren't any tool I knew. The tips were blackened as though burned in fire. I should have packed it. That's what documentation demanded. Instead, I propped it against the chimney and photographed it from 3 angles, telling myself I'd log it later. Truth is, something about it unsettled me, as if picking it up would make me complicit in whatever it had once been used for. That evening I camped high on a ridge with a good vantage. I rode until dark, then lay listening. At first it was ordinary, night insects, the pop of the fire. Then, slowly, the sounds thinned out until even the flames crackled like they were muffled under a blanket. I kept glancing up from my notebook, expecting movement at the tree line. Nothing. The silence swelled so thick it pressed against my eardrums. I forced myself to lie down, though sleep was shallow. Around midnight I woke with a jolt. Something was stroking the outside of my tent. Not rooting or pawing, smoother, deliberate, like fingertips dragging across nylon. I held my breath. The sound circled once, twice, then stopped above my head. 3 soft taps. Precise. I reached under my pad, gripped the knife, slid my flashlight free, counted to 5, then unzipped the flap and snapped on the beam. The ridge stared back at me blank. No eye shine, no scampering retreat. Just black trees and dead air. I sat cross-legged the rest of the night with the knife in my lap. At dawn, I packed so fast I nearly left my journal behind. I cut across a slope that should have given me a shortcut back toward my vehicle. It wasn't much of a trail, just a suggestion through laurel thickets, loose rock underfoot. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Dozens pressed into moss and soil, all sizes. Some large, man-sized. Some no bigger than a child's. None shod. Just bare feet. Fresh in places, crisp at the edges. Others worn faint. And they weren't all heading one way. Some led uphill, some down. Some looped back on themselves like dancers circling in confusion. I froze, staring. The forest around me held its breath. I called out before I could stop myself. "Hello? Anyone there?" My own voice felt stolen, swallowed before it reached the trees. Nothing answered. By afternoon, my GPS gave out. Coordinates blinked and reset to impossible points, sometimes miles away, sometimes floating midair. I restarted twice before shoving it in my pocket and resorting to compass and sun. That's when I wandered into the hollow. The slope dipped gradual. I barely noticed until I was at the bottom. And then I realized there was no sound at all. Not diminished, gone. Even my own breath felt dampened. In the center of the hollow lay a circle of 12 stones, each the same size, evenly spaced. Inside it, neat as if someone had placed it that morning, lay the iron rod from the chimney. The same twisted ends, the same scorch marks. I had left it miles behind. I turned without thinking, climbed out fast, compass needle spinning before snapping back like it couldn't make up its mind. My legs shook. Every step I expected to feel fingers brush the back of my neck. The sun was bleeding out when I reached the final slope. That's when I saw them. 3 shapes standing just inside the trees. Tall, still barefoot. Too far for detail. Faces blurred by shadow. They didn't move, didn't advance. Just watched. I stood frozen for a count of 10, then bolted down the road. My gear was still at the campsite miles back. I didn't care. I jammed the key into the Jeep, engine roaring to life, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop until asphalt stretched under my tires and Ridgeway's single blinking stoplight came into view. I filed the report 2 days later, pared down to the barest essentials. Trail overgrown. Bridge gone. Valley unstable. Enough to tick boxes, nothing more. I didn't mention footprints. Didn't mention rods or stones or figures. Some truths aren't meant to be official. Back at the archive, I laid out the maps. I noticed something I hadn't before. The CCC sheets all carried a mark in one corner, tiny, almost a doodle. 12 dots arranged in a circle, one line slashing through the center. No surveyor's notation, no legend. Just there, inked 70 years ago by hands long dead. Since then, my nights haven't been the same. Sometimes, drifting towards sleep, I hear those 3 taps above my headboard, soft and deliberate. Sometimes, when I wake before dawn, I find grit on the floor beneath the bed, shaped like bare prints fading into nothing. And once, only once, when I dozed too long at the archive desk, I swear I opened my eyes to see the iron rod resting across the old topo sheets, waiting for me. I wasn't a ranger, a scientist, or even someone who sought out solitude. I was a 36-year-old field technician from South Carolina whose life had fallen apart quicker than I could patch it together. My girlfriend of 8 years had left, my father had died in April, and I had no permanent address, just a cluttered storage unit full of cardboard boxes and the occasional borrowed couch. When a contract came through from a private ecological consultancy asking if I'd take a seasonal placement in the mountains along the Kentucky-Virginia line, I said yes before they finished the sentence. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and the thought of being alone with nothing but data sheets and trees sounded like a relief. The job was to monitor forest regrowth in one of the more remote sections of the Jefferson National Forest, where abandoned coal cuts and blackberry thickets had swallowed each other over decades. I was to live on site for 5 months, in a prefab monitoring cabin they'd hauled in on a flatbed truck years earlier. My duty was simple: hike sections of assigned grid squares, check on growth markers, swap out batteries and motion-activated cameras, and note anything unusual. It wasn't exactly dream work, but it kept me away from bars, from the phone calls I wasn't returning, from the city where every corner carried a memory I didn't want anymore. They dropped me off in a lifted utility truck on a washed-out road 30 miles from pavement. The cabin stood on a bare patch of scraped clay, sheet metal walls, a tin roof, a cot, a propane heater, and a generator that sputtered like an old man coughing. A single radio antenna jutted from a pipe, giving me emergency contact once a week when I checked in on Sundays. No phone service, no internet. The only voices I'd hear would be my own mutterings. The first few weeks passed with a sort of quiet rhythm. I hiked, logged saplings and ground cover, shifted trail cameras, drank coffee boiled in a tin pot, and went to bed with the sun. I saw deer every morning, black bear tracks on 2 occasions, and more coyotes than I cared for. At night, the forest was a living orchestra, cicadas, frogs, owls, branches creaking. The silence of the place was strange at first, but not frightening. It reminded me of my childhood camping trips, before the world had gotten so damn complicated. The first oddity came in the 3rd week, sometime after 2 in the morning. I woke without knowing why. The room was black except for the faint green blink of the generator's fuel monitor. Then came the sound, something circling the cabin, footsteps light but deliberate, crunching through leaf litter. I lay still, half convinced it was a bear nosing around, but then came a new noise, the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the dirt. Slow, halting, like timber being pulled end over end, or a length of chain drawn tight. It stopped just beneath the window by my cot. I held my breath until my chest burned. No knock, no growl, no voice. Just the dragging back and forth for nearly 10 minutes. Finally it ceased, and the forest slipped back into restless quiet. At dawn, I checked the clearing outside. Nothing. The ground was too hard-packed for tracks. No displaced stones, no gouges, no sign of dragging. I logged it in my notebook under unconfirmed nocturnal disturbance, then convinced myself it was an injured bear moving oddly. But the dragging returned. Not every night. Some nights passed in total calm, but often enough that sleep became a fragile, broken thing. Always the same, slow circling, scraping sounds, stopping just out of sight. I stopped opening the shutters after dark. A week later, I hiked east to swap out one of the cameras mounted on a chestnut oak. When I arrived, the steel mount was there, still bolted firm to the trunk. The camera itself was gone. Unscrewed, lifted cleanly away. Not ripped, not clawed. Removed by hands. I cursed, assuming poachers, and hiked back to the cabin. That evening I tried to report the loss over shortwave. The unit didn't just fail to connect, it was dead silent. No hiss of static, no hum. As if the airwaves themselves had been cut. I pulled the panel off, checked the battery, the wiring, the antenna. Everything appeared intact. The night before it had worked fine. By then, my nerves were beginning to wear. I decided I'd leave at first light, walk east to the ranger station 15 miles away. But the morning betrayed me. The generator sputtered out. My water filter cracked when I packed it. Worst of all, when I turned the ignition in the old truck they'd left me, nothing happened. Not a click. The lights flashed once and went black. I opened the hood, expecting corrosion or loose wires. Nothing obvious. Then I crouched lower and froze, for deep gouges raked across the gas tank. Not scratches, gouges. Metal peeled like a can opener had torn through it. Too precise for rock damage, too clean for teeth or claws. My stomach dropped. Near the rear tires, imprints marked the dirt. Footprints. Human but elongated, stretched almost twice as long as mine. The left foot planted flat, the right dragged as though lame. A staggered pattern leading from the treeline to the truck and back again. I sat inside the cabin all day after that, doors bolted, my wrench across my lap. I barely breathed. The dragging didn't come that night. Instead, at precisely 3:15 in the morning, a new sound rose. Breathing. Wet, heavy just beyond the thin metal of the front door. It drew close, retreated, then pressed in again, like a tide surging against the walls. For knocks followed, measured and slow. Not pounding, not playful, just 4 soft taps. I gripped the wrench, so hard my knuckles bled pale. I didn't move, didn't dare. Dawn came like salvation. When I opened the door, the porch was empty. No tracks, no gouges. Only a single bird lying dead, its neck wrenched, eyes gone. I nearly vomited. That was the breaking point. I strapped my pack, slung canteens, and started walking. 15 miles east. No plan but survival. For 4 hours I hiked without pause, heart thundering at every twig crack. Around mile 8, I heard it again. The dragging. Behind me, keeping distance, pulling across stone and root. I didn't run at first, just pushed my pace faster, steady, careful not to trip. The sound followed. I refused to look back. Then I saw it. At the edge of vision, 20 yards behind, crouched low beside a maple trunk. Its skin was ashen gray, stretched thin across too many bones. Long black hair veiled most of its face, but what showed was wrong. Its shoulders jutted too high, its spine curled in a serpentine arc. It didn't walk. It pulled itself crookedly on its arms, legs trailing broken behind like dead weight. It stopped, lifted its head. The mouth spread in a smile, wide jagged, teeth long and thin like splinters of glass. Then it raised one long arm and tapped the tree beside it. For slow knocks, echoing the rhythm at my door. I ran. I don't remember dropping my pack, don't remember tearing my palms on rock. I ran until I collapsed less than a mile from the ranger station, crawling the last 100 feet. A ranger found me sprawled in dirt, half delirious. He carried me inside, pressed water to my lips, asked what had happened. My tongue refused to shape the words. I managed only, "Truck's dead. Need help." He drove me back that afternoon. My truck started on the first turn of the key. The gouges were gone. The radio hummed fine. The cabin neat as I'd left it, but the bird still lay on the porch. The ranger said it must have been foxes or bobcats. He suggested time off, a week in town. I didn't argue. I took a cheap motel room and never went back. Later, researching in the library in Norton, I found something in a half-forgotten folklore collection compiled by a Baptist preacher in the 1880s. He described a dragging man seen along the ridges, a crooked figure with one ruined leg, leaving long footprints in mud. Farmers claimed he came knocking at cabins in storms, for taps at the door. They said he carried away livestock, sometimes children, and left a twisted bird in place of what he took. No one knew if he was spirit, man, or curse. Just that he lingered where roads ended and silence grew heavy. I never told my employers the truth. On paper, I transferred west the next season, to open desert and endless sky. But at night, even under the clean stars, I sometimes hear it again. The scrape of something heavy dragging across gravel, just beyond the window, keeping time with my breath. For taps, soft as a whisper, reminding me it knows where I am. My name is Thomas Weaver, and I'm 50 years old. For most of my life I've been a county surveyor in West Virginia, the kind of job people don't notice unless a property line dispute boils over or a road gets carved where it shouldn't. It's not glamorous, but I grew up with maps and tape measures, and I always liked being outside more than in an office. When the state cut back on full-time staff, I took contract work, traveling to different forest tracts to check on easements, logging damage, or trail rights. That's how last fall, I wound up with a 3-day assignment in a remote patch of Cherokee National Forest, just across the Virginia line, where some old rights-of-way had been left unresolved. I'd never worked that stretch before. The locals in the nearest town, Dalton Gap, didn't have much good to say about it. They called it the Hanging Woods, though no one could explain the name to me directly. Some muttered about old homesteads, others about accidents with miners or trappers. A man at the gas station just warned me not to camp near the old orchard on the ridge. "Folks here knocking there," he said, then clamped his mouth shut like he'd already said too much. I laughed it off, the way I always do with Appalachian folk warnings. You hear enough of them, and they all start to sound like stories meant to keep kids indoors after dark. The work order said to hike a loop around 12 miles of neglected trails, flag erosion, and mark any historic structures. I parked my state-issued pickup at the gravel turnout, tossed on my pack, and locked the doors. The sky was gray, October cool, with the smell of damp leaves in the air. The trail started ordinary enough, faded blazes, switchbacks carved steep into hillsides, and bridges that looked ready to collapse if a stiff wind hit them. I walked slow, marking notes. The land had a stillness to it. Not peaceful, not threatening, just heavy, like the forest carried something on its shoulders. By mid-afternoon, I came across the ruins of an old farmhouse. The foundation stones were scattered, the chimney leaning sideways like it wanted to topple, but hadn't decided yet. I snapped photos, jotted coordinates, then pressed on another mile before camping on a rise above a dry creek bed. Dinner was jerky and instant coffee boiled in a battered steel mug. The woods were quieter than I liked, but I told myself it was the season. Fewer insects, fewer birds. I lay down early and drifted off. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I woke to a sound. Not an animal rummaging, not branches creaking. It was rhythmic. A dull thump, followed by another, slow and deliberate, like someone dropping a weight into soft soil, over and over. My skin prickled. I sat upright in the sleeping bag, straining to listen. The sound went on for maybe a minute, then cut off, leaving the woods as silent as if they'd swallowed the noise whole. I stayed awake until dawn, knife in hand, staring at the tent walls. The second day I moved deeper into the loop. The trail all but vanished in places, swallowed by vines and moss. While clearing brush near a downed oak, I noticed 3 long grooves carved into the trunk, evenly spaced and clean, as if something had pressed sharp tools against it. I crouched, touched the grooves. Too wide for claws, too smooth for storm damage. I snapped a picture, logged it as possible vandalism, though the hairs on my arms wouldn't settle. Late that morning, I found something worse. A lean-to made from saplings lashed together with cord, covered by a rotting blue tarp. Smoke stains darkened the ground in front of it. A fire had been burning there not long ago. Too recent for comfort in a section of forest marked, rarely trafficked, on my maps. I circled it slowly, called it in on the radio. Only silence met me, not even static. The radio had worked fine the day before. Now it was dead. I marked the spot with tape and pushed on uneasy. By dusk, I made camp beside a spring seeping clear water from a stone wall. I filtered some into bottles, ate a half-hearted meal, and tried to focus on my notes. The woods pressed close. There was a sound beneath the quiet, a low vibration, like machinery far underground. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, but it wouldn't fade. After midnight, the footsteps came. Not the heavy tromp of a bear. Not the random scuttle of raccoons. These were measured. Human. Crunch, pause. Crunch, pause. Drawing closer. I slit the tent flap open an inch, the knife shaking in my grip. At first I saw nothing. Then, in the clearing where my fire had burned out, a figure stood. Tall. Thin. Its arms hung too long, reaching almost to its knees. It didn't carry a light. It didn't stumble. It stood perfectly still, head cocked at a strange angle, like it was listening. I stopped breathing. The shape lingered, unmoving, then melted back into the dark, as though the trees themselves had absorbed it. I sat there till dawn, heart thundering, never once closing my eyes. I packed fast and backtracked the way I'd come. No breakfast, no water stop. Just walking hard, eyes darting to every shadow. About an hour in, I passed another lean-to, this one collapsed, old. Inside, bones had been arranged in a spiral. Not fresh, but cleaned, stacked deliberately. On the back wall of a rotting board, someone had carved words over and over, still. The newer cuts curled the wood pale. My throat went dry. I didn't take photos. I didn't log the coordinates. I kept moving. 3 hours later, I came to the farmhouse ruins again. Something had changed. On the warped porch boards, a doll sat. Roughly sewn, stuffed with rags, its face blank except for 2 black threads stitched for eyes. Its head was tilted toward the trail, like it was waiting. I didn't pause. I didn't breathe. I walked straight past, never turning back. When I reached the gravel turnout, my truck gleamed like salvation. I nearly collapsed reaching it, but when I gripped the handle, I noticed the dirt by the rear tire. Prints. Bare feet, long and narrow, each step pressed deep, one dragging slightly behind. They led from the woods to the truck and vanished in the gravel. The engine started without issue. I drove with the windows down, eyes fixed on the mirror. Back at the station, I filed a stripped-down report. Erosion, broken bridges, vandalism. Left out the figure. Left out the doll. Mark, the ranger on duty, flipped through my pictures. He stopped at one, a snapshot I'd taken near the spring. "This was east side, yeah?" he asked. I nodded. He turned the screen toward me. In the corner, half hidden behind a trunk, was a face. Pale, featureless, watching. I transferred west that winter. Utah, Colorado, places with sky stretched wide enough to breathe. I told myself I'd put Tennessee behind me. But sometimes, in the small hours of the night, I hear that steady thumping again, soft, deliberate, like something being dropped into dirt just outside my window. And once, only once, I came home from work to find a small cloth doll sitting on my porch, its head tilted toward the door. I'm not a notary. I'm a land assessor, the kind of man you call when an old deed needs validating or a forgotten lot line has to be walked and logged. 38 years old, divorced, no kids, and too stubborn to leave the mountains I was born in. Most of my work is dull, traipsing across wooded boundaries with a transit and tape, stamping papers to prove some crumbling farmhouse actually belongs to whoever inherited it. I don't mind the solitude. The woods are where I feel less useless. The trees don't care about my debts, my thinning hair, or my half-empty fridge. They just stand there, patient as saints. Last October, I was contracted for a 3-day verification job outside a place called Medford, near the Kentucky-Virginia border. The request came through a regional law office that barely gave details. Confirm parcel boundaries for a property tied up in probate, file a signed statement of observation, and send it back by courier. The payment offered was 3 times my normal rate. That alone should have made me suspicious. The directions listed no house number, no mailbox, just coordinates and the name of an old trail spur, Cold Iron Hollow. I'd heard of it once, years ago, in the vague way mountain folks speak about places they'd rather avoid. Something about families that kept to themselves, something about knocking sounds at night. I dismissed it as one of those rural stories you hear at gas stations, sandwiched between ghost lights and panther sightings. The first leg of the drive was normal, rolling farmland, ridges shaded orange by dying leaves. Then the pavement dropped away to gravel, then to rutted dirt. The road narrowed into a tunnel of arching branches. My GPS faltered, blinked, then gave up completely. No service bars, no map, nothing but the saved last turn into Cold Iron Hollow. At the end of the road sat a house I hadn't expected. Not a trailer or hunting shack, but a 2-story cabin, swollen with age. Its boards sagged inward like the walls had been breathing too long. The shutters hung limp. No vehicles sat out front. No smoke lifted from the chimney. Just silence pressing down like a weight. I parked maybe 10 feet from the porch, hesitated with my hand on the door handle. As I debated whether to honk, the front door eased open with a creak. A woman's voice called, "You're the assessor?" The sound jolted me more than it should have. I cleared my throat. "Yes, ma'am. I am." She didn't step outside. She lingered in shadow behind the warped screen door. I grabbed my kit and climbed the porch. Inside smelled of smoke, mold, and something older, wool maybe or dried herbs. Wallpaper yellowed and curled. Rugs frayed thin. A cold wood stove sagged in the corner, its ash pan scattered with gray dust. The woman emerged, mid-50s, hair pulled under a scarf, skirt brushing the floor. Her face was lined deep, but her eyes unsettled me, bright yet flat, as if all warmth had been scraped away and only watchfulness remained. Her smile didn't match them. She gestured me toward a table already laid out with papers. "It's the deed," she said. "My brother passed, and I need to record the land as mine." The documents were neat, too neat. Title pages, notary lines, even a checklist. They looked legitimate at first glance. I checked her ID. It matched. My hands fell into their usual rhythm. Forms, stamps, signatures. The routine calmed me. Still, she never sat. She stood behind me, watching, expression unreadable. When I packed up, she said, "There's one more signature required. For my boy. He's not able to come down." I hesitated. "Is he competent to sign?" "He understands," she answered too quickly, already leading me to the stairs. I should have refused. Procedure said I must. But the silence in the house pressed hard, and her eyes left little room for negotiation. I followed. The stairwell smelled different from the downstairs. Wet fabric, mildew, and something metallic beneath it all. The narrow hall was lined with portraits, faces fading into shadow. At the end, A door stood open, a lamp burning yellow inside. She stepped aside, gesturing. I entered. The boy sat on a bed pushed against the wall. He wasn't a boy, not exactly, late teens perhaps, or older but stunted. His body was slight, almost brittle. Quilts and furs were piled around him like a nest. He faced the corner, head bowed. "You don't speak much," the woman whispered. I asked his name. No answer. She supplied it for him. Then she slid the pen into his limp hand, guiding it down to the page. The motion was jerky, clumsy, the letters dragged in slow, crooked lines. When the pen lifted, the air in the room shifted. My ears popped. A pressure settled over us, heavy as if the house itself exhaled. I turned to leave, throat tight. That's when the boy's head turned slightly, just enough for me to see his face. His mouth was sewn shut. Thick black thread pulled through skin in ugly X's. Some stitches had puckered red, others scarred flat as though they'd been there for months. His eyes, dull and wet, locked onto mine. I nearly stumbled backward. The woman only smiled faintly. "We appreciate your help." I didn't speak. I backed from the room, one step at a time. She followed close behind. At the bottom of the stairs, my hand found the doorknob. That's when it came, the sound from upstairs. A muffled scream. Raw, gagged, struggling past sealed lips. The noise burrowed into my chest, more animal than human. I froze. The woman stopped mid-room. She didn't rush up. She didn't flinch. She stared down at the floorboards like she was listening for something below them. Her hands hung limp at her sides. I bolted. My bag slammed against my hip as I tore across the porch. I hurled it into the passenger seat and fired the ignition. As the headlights cut across the yard, I saw them, figures emerging from the treeline. Barefoot, slow. Their heads were wrapped in cloth sacks knotted tight at the throat. They didn't shout or chase. They just advanced with patient steps, a dozen silhouettes threading from the woods toward the cabin. I didn't look twice. Tires sprayed gravel as I clawed down the lane, branches scraping the roof like claws. The GPS was still dead, but I trusted memory, counting curves until the blessed shimmer of pavement reappeared. I drove until cell service returned. Then I pulled onto the shoulder, hands shaking, and dialed the number listed as the originating contact on the paperwork. A man answered groggily. I asked if he or his family had recently signed deeds for property in Cold Iron Hollow. Silence. Then confusion. "No. My sister passed. Years back. House has been empty since." "How long?" I croaked. "For years," he said. I filed the report with the law office. The job vanished from my roster the next morning. The payment disappeared too, as if it had never been offered. I tried to forget, but some nights, when I wake around 3 in the morning, I hear it again. That muffled scream clawing through silence, pressing against the walls. And worse, once after a storm, I found a piece of cloth nailed to my porch post. A strip of fabric stiff with mildew, punctured with thick black stitches and crooked X's. I'm not a ranger, and I'm not some scientist either. I'm a contract soil analyst, 41, divorced twice. The kind of man who gets paid to tramp around the woods with little metal cylinders and pH kits to figure out how much erosion is chewing away at government land. The pay is decent, the solitude better. Nobody breathing down my neck. Nobody asking why I never stayed married or why I keep signing up for postings nobody else wants. Last summer, my assignment dropped me into a stretch of Appalachian backcountry near the Kentucky-Virginia line, not far from a coal ghost town called Ellesmere. On paper, I was supposed to log samples along a ridge called Stony Fork Divide, 3 nights in, 3 nights out. Locals never called it that. They had their own name, the Devil's Bend. I thought it was the usual Appalachian flair for dramatics, but when a woman at the station store muttered it, she looked over her shoulder like the name itself might draw attention. She told me flat not to camp near the stacks. I asked what stacks, and she clammed up like I'd pried too far. The agency handed me a printed map that looked older than I was, a battery-heavy hand radio with the range of a child's toy, and a kit tent that still smelled like someone else's sweat. No phone service was expected. I tossed it all into my pack and headed out before dawn on a Tuesday. Calling it a trail would have been generous. More like a scar of dirt half swallowed by vines. The undergrowth clawed at me every 10 steps. webs plastering across my face until I started carrying a stick like a sword to sweep them aside. After about 4 miles of sweating through briars and tripping over shale, I found a shallow basin with decent sight lines. That mattered when you were alone. You wanted room to see whatever was coming. I checked in with the radio. Weak, but it hummed back. Dropped a pin on my GPS, though the thing wheezed like it was built during the Cold War. Then I staked my tent and pushed out in a 5-point circle, hammering cameras to trunks, marking sample trees. The woods were ordinary at first, chatter of squirrels, a blue jay's sharp call. But the farther I ranged, the quieter it became, like somebody was turning a dial down on the whole forest. By the time I looped back at dusk, even the insects had gone still. Dinner was rehydrated slop chewed on a log. I remember how thick the air felt, not humid exactly, but suspended, as if the trees themselves were waiting. I crashed around 11. Long hikes always wipe me out. Sometime after midnight, I snapped awake, ears ringing. At first I thought it was silence making me nervous, the kind that pounds harder than noise. Then it came, a sound I'd never heard in 20 years working woods. It wasn't a scream, not exactly, but a shrill, high wail cut off mid-note, as though something had snatched the sound right out of its own throat. It came again, same length, same pitch, a third time, perfectly measured, each one the same. My gut told me fox at first. They make eerie sounds, but fox cries rise and stutter. This was clipped, precise, artificial. I unzipped the flap just enough to peek. Dark, no eye shine, no stirring leaves. Then came something worse, a pattern of knocks. Not woodpecker chatter. This was steady, deliberate. 5 sharp raps, perfectly spaced, echoing like hammers on hollow timber. I froze, my fingers numb on the zipper. Every nerve told me not to breathe, not to move. Eventually I retreated back inside, lay flat, eyes stretched wide, waiting for dawn. When the light finally bled into the tent walls, I staggered outside. Everything looked as it had. The forest swayed gentle, birds picking at dew. I laughed bitterly at myself and tried to shrug it off, but a coil of dread sat in my chest. I told myself I'd check the ground in the direction the knocks had carried from. About 300 yards east, I stumbled into a clearing that stopped me cold. 3 deer legs, just legs, no body, arranged in a triangle with hooves pointed in, each severed clean as though by a blade. No fur scatter, no blood pool, no drag marks in the grass. Someone had placed them like a compass pointing at something I couldn't see. I knelt, touched one. It was icy against my palm, far too cold for the 70-degree night we'd had. No flies, no ants. Wrong in every sense. I bagged one for testing, hands shaking, then called it in on the radio. Static spit, then a ranger's voice bled through faint. You want backup? Pride stiffened my jaw. No. I'll log it. Recheck tomorrow. God, I wish I'd said yes. That evening, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I sat outside the tent, flashlight off but clutched tight. Every half hour I tapped the radio just to know it hadn't died. Around 1:45, it began again. 5 knocks. Same rhythm. Only this time, they came from the edge of my clearing. I snapped the flashlight on. White light spilled across trunks. For 1 second I saw it, a bare arm, too long, pale as candle wax, no sleeve, no hair. It jerked back behind a tree the moment the beam found it, like a child caught misbehaving. Who's there? My voice cracked across the stillness. No answer. Then the screams returned. 3 of them, identical to the night before, the exact same pitch and timing, as if someone was replaying a recording. I sat against the tent wall until my legs cramped, light fixed on the trees, knife across my knees. At dawn, I broke camp in a frenzy. Left the cameras, left the samples. I wanted out. Back at the station, I laid it all out to my supervisor. No dressing it up. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just told me to take a few days, said he'd send a team to retrieve the gear. 2 days later, I came back anyway. I couldn't shake it. Needed to see the footage. We hiked in as a crew of 4. The site looked untouched. No prints, no trampled brush. But every camera had been rotated slightly off its original angle. Not torn down, not smashed. Adjusted, deliberately. We carried them out. Back at base, we played the footage. The southwest cam caught a shadow too tall to be a bear, sliding between trees with upright grace. Too smooth, too quiet. The next cam showed a hand, those same pale fingers hovering before the lens for 10 long seconds, perfectly still. The last cam was worse. The one closest to the clearing of deer legs recorded it clearly. 5 hollow knocks, measured and clean. Then silence. No footsteps, no retreat. Just nothing. The agency stamped the zone restricted, citing instability. But over coffee later, my supervisor leaned close. Said I wasn't the first. 3 years ago, another tech swore something in those woods copied animal. Sounds too perfect, too exact. Another said she saw a tall figure that moved without blinking. Both made it out. Neither ever went back. Neither will I. At least, not willingly. But sometimes late at night, when my house is still, I hear it again, 5 knocks, steady and patient on the beams of my attic. And I know what the old woman at the gas station meant when she warned me about the stacks. She didn't mean piles of rocks. She meant the sound itself, the old mountain tale of the knockers of God's elbow, who hammer at the bones of deer and men alike, shaping them into patterns no living soul should see. I wasn't a surveyor, not officially. My background was in historical preservation, the kind of grunt work where you photograph collapsing barns and log the age of forgotten cemeteries before the county bulldozes everything to make room for some developer's idea of progress. I was 34 then, bouncing between short contracts and scraping by, when the State Historical Society gave me a solo assignment in southern Appalachia, near the Virginia-Kentucky border. The task sounded simple. Walk an old cart path that hadn't been verified in decades, document whether any remnants still existed, and photograph any structures along the way. On paper it was nothing unusual, an archival box to tick before funding expired. But the locals had another name for that road, the Warden's Path. The way they said it made me hesitate, though not enough to turn the job down. I asked around town before heading out, more out of curiosity than anything else. Most folks shook their heads, said the trail was long gone, grown under, and not worth the trouble. One man at the feed store muttered, "Best left to the ones still walking it," then wouldn't meet my eyes. Another woman told me flat not to camp near the stones, though she wouldn't explain what stones she meant. It was early September when I drove out to the old mining town that had once sat at the trailhead. What remained was a cluster of brick shells with their roofs caved in, a rusted water tower bent like a snapped finger, and weeds reclaiming everything. My map showed the Warden's Path beginning near a collapsed storehouse. I parked in the weeds, locked the car out of habit, and slung my pack over my shoulders. At first, I couldn't even find the trail, just thick brush and uniform trees. But after circling a while, I noticed a faint seam in the undergrowth where the ground dipped just enough. A thinner patch in the canopy, like something had once been cut there long ago. I pushed through and began walking. The silence was immediate. Not quiet like a park at dawn, but emptied, stripped bare of sound. No birds, no insects, not even the buzz of gnats. Just my boots grinding against leaves. The air tasted stale, and I told myself it was just nerves. The trail was narrow, faint, but present. I ducked under sagging limbs, stepped over collapsed logs, and marked waypoints every few hundred feet with my handheld GPS. A mile or so in, I noticed the first stones. 3 of them stacked knee-high off the side of the path. Neat, deliberate. Cairns weren't unusual in these mountains, but this felt different. Too old to be weekend hiker art, too clean to have toppled over the decades. I snapped a photo and moved on. Not long after, I found another. Taller, different arrangement. Then another, and another. Each one grew more complex, like whoever built them was leaving a trail of increasing intent. Some were balanced in impossible ways, thin stones perched upright like teeth. I felt myself pulled along, though I couldn't have explained why. By the time the sun angled low, I stumbled into a small clearing. In its center squatted a cabin. Its timbers sagged inward, windows gaping. Vines throttled the walls, but the roof still held. What unsettled me wasn't its decay. It was that it was intact at all. The mining town behind me had rotted into rubble, yet here stood a house as though it had simply been abandoned yesterday. I should have left then, but curiosity won. The door hung loose on rusted hinges. I pressed my hand against it, and it sighed open. The smell inside struck me first, dust layered thick, mixed with mildew and iron. Furniture slumped in corners. A rusted stove crouched blackened in the hearth. Plates still sat on the table, mottled with decades of grime. It didn't feel abandoned so much as paused. That's when I heard it, whispering. Faint at first, like a radio tuned badly, then stronger. Words layered over each other, dozens of voices murmuring in tones I couldn't place. Not English. Not any language I knew. It seeped from the walls, from the floorboards, from everywhere at once. I froze 2 steps inside, my breath sharp in my chest. The whispers grew angry. The pitch bent low, like 100 throats growling together. The air chilled so fast I felt it in my teeth. My ears popped. The boards under my boots quivered. I spun for the door just as it slammed shut, rattling the whole frame. I clawed the handle. Jammed. It didn't budge. My foot braced against the wall as I yanked harder. Behind me, the chorus swelled, wrapping around my skull until it felt like something was trying to shake me loose from my own body. My chest constricted. My vision tunneled. And then silence. The door creaked open on its own. I didn't hesitate. I ran. Branches tore at my arms as I barreled down the path. The forest didn't look the same on the way out. The trees leaned closer, shadows stretched in unnatural ways. The light dimmer though sunset shouldn't have fallen yet. My compass needle spun wildly, settling only after I shoved it back into my pocket. More than once I swore I heard steps pacing behind me, but each time I whipped around, nothing stood there. Only the stacked stones, more of them now, where there hadn't been any before. By the time I crashed through brush and staggered into the weeds where my car sat, my lungs were ragged, my keys slick in my shaking hand. I dove inside, slammed the locks, and peeled out, gravel spitting behind me. Only once I hit the highway did I slow enough to breathe. I never filed the truth in my report. I wrote that the path was impassable, the trail markers indistinguishable, not worth state resources. They struck it from the project list. That part wasn't even a lie. But I never told them what I found. Never told them the whispers are still with me. Because sometimes even now, lying awake in the dark, I hear them again. Not faint, not far, right against the walls of my own house. The same seething voices, murmuring in unison, like they carried themselves back with me when I fled. And once, only once, I woke to find stones stacked on my porch. Small, neat, balanced impossibly high. I don't go near them. I don't touch them, and I don't sleep in silence anymore. I'm not an explorer, not in the romantic sense. I'm a survey contractor, 40 years old, a widower with too much time to kill and not enough reason to stay home. My clients aren't government agencies so much as private firms with interests tucked deep into Appalachia. Timber outfits, mining companies, real estate speculators dreaming about mountain resorts. They don't need a poet or a naturalist. They need someone to go where roads don't reach, walk ridges, log coordinates, and come back with a sketch of what the land hides. The work doesn't bother me. I like the isolation. It dulls the grief, shuts out the world. A forest doesn't pity you. It doesn't ask how you're holding up. Last August, I was assigned a grid of land straddling the Tennessee, North Carolina border, part of a tract the company had just leased for possible harvest. I'd seen remote corners of Appalachia before, but this one felt different the moment I studied the maps. The quadrant cut through a section labeled Old Trace Hollow. The contour lines wavered oddly, like whoever drafted them hadn't trusted their own measurements. Handwritten notes in the margin read, "Avoid stacked formations." When I asked my contact about it, he waved me off. Local stories. Don't get hung up on them. Just flag erosion, wildlife presence, water access. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Stay clear of any stone rings. That land has complications." It was the kind of warning meant to spook rookies. I'd been at this too long to take it seriously. The driver dropped me off at the head of an overgrown track. He didn't say much, just squinted at the tree line, then muttered, "Don't linger past dark in the hollow." His tires threw dust as he left. I hiked 2 miles in before making camp near a thin creek. Standard stuff. Boil water, log GPS pins, check radio signal. By 11 I'd zipped into the tent and was writing in my log when I heard it. Movement, not frantic scurrying or the light step of a deer. This was deliberate, steady, heavy enough to press dry leaves flat. It circled the far side of my camp, never rushing, never pausing. Too close for comfort. My hand found my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. I held still, heart pounding. Eventually the sound drifted away. At dawn I checked for tracks. Nothing. Not a print, not a scuff. The second day I pushed deeper, climbing ridges and dropping into steep draws. The canopy was thick enough to choke sunlight, and my GPS flickered in and out. The forest carried a tension I couldn't name. Even the squirrels seemed absent. By mid-afternoon I found something the maps hadn't marked. A ring of stones 4 feet tall, coiled like a serpent swallowing its own tail. The rocks were fist-sized, stacked with eerie precision. Not a cairn but a spiral, flawless in symmetry. I circled it twice, uneasy. It didn't look weathered, not like something forgotten decades ago. It looked kept, maintained. Against every instinct, I logged the coordinates and took photos. As I left, I couldn't stop glancing back. The formation never moved, but I felt watched all the same. That night I overextended, pushing further than planned. The woods felt wrong, like whenever I stopped, something else stopped too, holding just beyond the edge of vision. Always on my right side, always pacing. I called out once, voice too loud in the stillness. No answer. I camped in a shallow ditch, no fire, gear barely unpacked. Slept with the sidearm across my lap. I never really slept at all. On the third day, I cut down into a ravine to shave distance. The footing was slick, vines hanging like ropes. Halfway through, I stopped dead. A tree had been split down the middle, as if by axe, both halves standing open like a book. Inside the raw wood, carvings ran deep, symbols I didn't know. Not letters, not pictures, shapes that hurt to stare at. Angular, geometric, some looping. My throat tightened. I didn't take photos, didn't log it. I backed out slow and looped wide, refusing to pass between those carved halves. By late afternoon, I crossed a ridge and stumbled into a clearing that made my stomach drop. Bones. Dozens of them. Small animals mostly, birds, squirrels, rabbits, but arranged with care. Laid in patterns across the grass, spirals and arrows pointing toward the tree line. Some lashed with twine, others tied with feathers, a few jammed upright into the soil like stakes. None of it looked weathered. Someone had built it recently, and someone had tended it. The trees above me hushed all at once. No wind, no birds. Even the leaves seemed to hold still. I stepped back until I found the trail again, then forced myself to keep moving. I didn't stop at dusk. I didn't even consider making camp. I just walked, headlamp bouncing, compass in hand. Near midnight the air changed. It felt thin, brittle, like I'd climbed higher than the ridge line suggested. My chest tightened as though I couldn't draw enough breath. Every sound was gone. The crickets, the frogs, even my own footsteps dulled as though the ground refused to echo me back. Then came the scream. It started low, unmistakably human. But it stretched, climbed, twisted into something metallic, ragged, like a person forced through broken glass. The sound didn't taper. It cut off sharp, then began again, higher, crueler. My legs carried me before I thought. Branches whipped my arms, my pack slammed my spine. I didn't care. The scream followed. Sometimes close, sometimes impossibly far. I didn't stop until my body gave out near a downed oak. I lay there gasping, chest heaving, too afraid to close my eyes. The scream didn't return, but I heard something else, footsteps. Slow, heavy, nearer each time, and breathing. Shallow, ragged, like someone just behind me. As the sky bruised with dawn, I staggered onto an old service road and found what should have been the ranger station. Or what was left of it. The building sagged under vines, windows black with rot. Yet on the porch sat a man in a ranger's jacket, as though he'd been waiting. He rose when he saw me. His eyes were shadowed, but he spoke evenly. "You made it out late." I stammered, told him everything. The spiral stones, the carved tree, the bones, the scream. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly, lips pressing into a line. "That section," he said finally. "We don't map it anymore." No explanation. No sympathy. The company cut my pay in half, citing incomplete data. They didn't ask questions. They handed my grid to another contractor, a younger guy named Daryl. He never filed a single note. Never checked in. His tent was found empty weeks later. Sometimes I tell myself it was hysteria, exhaustion, tricks of the woods. But then I hear it again, in dreams, in half-sleep, in the moments when the house settles too quiet. That scream, climbing higher than a human throat should. And once, in my backyard, I found stones coiled in a perfect spiral against the fence, damp with morning dew, balanced so carefully they could not have been the wind. My name is Martin, and I'm 42. I'm not a hiker in the traditional sense, not a ranger or an adventurer. I work as an environmental consultant, the kind of man companies hire when they want liability off their hands. Usually, I inspect rundown parcels of land slated for development. Wetlands that have to be checked, slopes that need erosion studies, forgotten woodlets that might hide asbestos dumps or sinkholes. I don't climb mountains for fun. I go where I'm told because a paycheck is attached. Last summer, my firm was subcontracted to look at an area on the Virginia side of the Blue Ridge, not far from the Tennessee border. The locals called it Miller's Trace, though it wasn't on any official map. Old men at the diner said the trail had existed once, back before the mines shut down, but they spoke of it like a scar the woods tried to close. One woman told me flatly not to follow the stone markers if I found them. She said it like she was warning me about touching a hot stove, not sharing folklore. I ignored them. I always do. The assignment was 3 days on foot. Walk the suspected corridor, log coordinates, photograph any standing structures, and come back with a report. The company paid me double for agreeing to go alone. That should have been a red flag, but money has a way of dulling instinct. I drove until the road gave up, ending in weeds and gravel at the edge of an old fire line. A tower leaned rust-red in the distance, its stairs broken off halfway up. I parked by a stand of oaks and slung my pack, the usual loadout: maps, GPS, radio, water filters, pistol I rarely needed but always carried. The sky was clear, late August heat softened by the canopy. I told myself this would be another quiet job. The first miles were easy enough. A faint trail still pressed into the ground, the kind of compacted earth that doesn't vanish even when neglected. By mid-afternoon I'd logged decent notes: slope angles, soil samples, creek crossings. The forest was hushed but not strange, just the usual Appalachian weight, heavy with green. Then, not long before dusk, I saw the first stone circle. It was waist-high and wide, built from pale rocks stacked in a perfect ring. Not a fire pit. There was no ash, no charcoal, nothing scorched. The stones were too clean, as though brushed and scrubbed. Moss didn't dare cling to them. I crouched, puzzled, ran my fingers across the smooth surface. Cold, though the day was warm. I logged the coordinates, snapped a photo, and told myself it was a hiker's prank, or maybe something left by hunters long ago. I pressed on and camped near a dry creek bed. I cooked a pouch of rice, wrote in my logbook, and tried to shake the unease crawling under my ribs. The silence deepened as the sun bled out, too perfect, like the forest had pulled a blanket tight over itself. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of walking. Not shuffling, not scampering, walking. Slow, deliberate steps circling the tent. The rhythm was steady, the weight too measured to be an animal. I lay frozen, barely breathing, my hand creeping toward the pistol. The steps continued, crunching dry leaves, then faded into the trees. At dawn, I searched the perimeter. The dirt was pocked with prints. Human, bare feet, dozens of them. They overlapped, looping, circling, crossing themselves like someone had wandered aimlessly for hours right where I slept. Yet not a single trail led away from the site. A sane man would have left then, but I convinced myself it was some trick of soil, that my eyes were inventing patterns. I'd committed to the job. I kept going. The second day I moved fast, logging miles to shake the dread. The trail narrowed, choked by laurel and undergrowth. The forest pressed in so tightly I had to fight branches every 10 feet. Around noon, I found another stone circle. Then another. Each was larger, cleaner, more deliberate. One had a thin arch of bone laid across the top, bleached and fragile. By late afternoon, my nerves were shredded. The woods had gone utterly still. I caught myself spinning at shadows, feeling watched from every direction. Then I saw it, a sheet of something nailed to a trunk. At first I thought it was hide. Deerskin maybe, but when I stepped closer, bile rose in my throat. The flesh was mottled, human-sized, stretched taut, and tacked flat. Teeth were embedded in a curve, gums still clinging. 5 of them, white against the drying leather. My stomach flipped. I forced a photo, though my hands shook so hard it blurred, then stumbled away without looking back. That night I didn't cook, didn't write notes. I lay in my bag with the pistol across my chest, staring at the nylon ceiling. Around 2 in the morning it began, humming, low at first, deep and tuneless, rising and falling like a drone carried by the trees. It wasn't coming closer, but it grew louder, as if the forest itself had become an amplifier. My teeth buzzed with it. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it seeped through bone, a sound more felt than heard. I stayed like that until the sky began to gray. At dawn I broke camp in panic. My GPS still worked, but the trail all but vanished. The trees grew denser, older, trunks fat enough to block out the sun. Branches clawed my pack until I cursed aloud. I hacked through brush until I crested a rise and saw it below, a cabin. It shouldn't have been there. Not on the map, not in any record. Half collapsed, its roof sagging, logs black with rot. But the dirt in front of the door bore marks, dragged trails, as though something heavy had been pulled inside. The door hung ajar. I didn't enter. Instinct screamed not to. I circled wide and found a shed behind it, its planks buckling. Through a gap I glimpsed pale shapes stacked high. Bones. Hundreds of them. Birds, foxes, raccoons, but also smaller, fragile skeletons. One pile had sneakers beside it, toddler-sized, bright colors dulled by mildew. I didn't walk away. I ran. Branches whipped me bloody as I plunged downhill, not caring about bearings or slope. I trusted gravity to lead me out. Hours blurred together until my legs burned and my chest tore for air. The forest warped around me, every tree identical, every bend repeating itself. By late afternoon, I stumbled into a fence line. Posts leaned but still stood, barbed wire sagging low. I followed it like a lifeline until it met a creek. And beyond that, smoke. It came from a shack where a man sat tending a fire. Doyle was his name. Mid-50s, eyes sunken deep, face leathery from mountain winters. When I lurched into his clearing, he looked at me as though he'd seen a ghost. "Nobody comes from Trace Hollow," he said, voice flat. I collapsed near the fire, too spent to answer. He gave me water, let me use his landline. My call to the ranger station shook with static, but they understood my coordinates. They told me to stay put. That night I tried to sleep on Doyle's floor, but the humming returned, low and steady, rolling under the floorboards. I asked him about the trail, about the stones, about the whispers. He stared at the wall for a long time before finally muttering. People went missing there, always in threes. Search parties came back wrong, sick in their heads, seeing things that followed them home. At dawn, a helicopter lifted me out. The report I filed was stripped bare, terrain unstable, no structures viable. Officially, the trail didn't exist. Weeks later, I checked the records. No cabin, no shed, nothing noted about bones. Miller's trace was never logged again. The company never mentioned Doyle. But the story doesn't end there. Because sometimes, when the house is still and the night presses heavy, I hear it again. That humming. Not outside, inside, as if the walls are carrying it. And once, just once, I woke to find a ring of stones on my back porch. Clean, brushed, cold to the touch.